And I think right now, a lot of women don't feel safety, whether it's politically, whether it's physically, whether it's legally, like whatever. Like there's a lot of safety issues surrounding women. Hey there. Thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. I know that when you and I did a little Zoom chat, we were talking about what would we want to bring to the episodes? Like, what would we want to talk about? And I was just so blown away about what it is that you are doing in the martial arts world, and especially in the martial arts world for women and helping women kind of pave their way in that space. And it's like an area and I really want this podcast to be around disrupting places and talking about things that nobody else is talking about. And this is one that I definitely had no experience on and had no awareness on. And so I was so grateful to have you come, and I'm excited to be able to dive in with you and learn a little bit more about like what that world looks like and how that really works, and what are those like stereotypes and personas and feelings and experiences of women in that space. Before we do that, I would love to know just a little bit about you, how you got into martial arts. Like, what has that journey been like for you? And what do you love about what you do now?
Thank you, first of
Yeah.
all. My name is Laurien. I'm originally Dutch, but I moved for my PhD to Germany, where I met my husband on the mat, so kind of cliche, and now we have our own trauma-informed martial arts and yoga school. Before all that, as a minor, I unfortunately experienced sexual abuse, and people kind of tend to place the onus on you. So they're like, you need to learn to defend yourself. You need this, you need that. And back in the day, I took it to heart. And I mean, I loved martial arts always anyway. So why not? And when I started, I had PTSD, and not that I necessarily knew at that point what that meant, but I learned quickly when you go to jiu-jitsu, which is a very physical sport. It's like grappling. It's a bit like judo, but just that if you get each other to the ground, you continue to somebody taps to like a joint lock or a choke or something like that. So it's very, very physical. And what I then kind of noticed when it was time to spar, and at that time I was 48 kilos. I think that's like 115 pounds. So tiny in the Netherlands, where people are just big and people do not want to lose from a girl. So they also really went at it. So I had traumatic triggers as we sparred. So I was fighting myself. I was somewhere else. And at the same time, somebody's trying to submit you.
Yeah.
The coach at that time, when I approached him about that, did not understand that at all and was like, yeah, then you just should stop the roll. Not understanding that when you have a traumatic trigger, your rational brain is offline, you can't. You are somewhere else. You need an external person to interrupt and stop this and hopefully bring you back safely. So also there, I once passed by and I overheard him saying to another person, like, well, jiu-jitsu's not for her. She's not going to stick. And that just really pissed me off, because I was thinking like, what? And there was also another moment where, like in jiu-jitsu, you have like belts with a black tip, and then you get stripes on it. It's just tape, really. If you have 4 stripes, that means then that you can get to your next belt. Some are more, they care more about belts than other gyms. We do not care much about belts, but there it was. And then after me, there came a guy, and he trained a few classes, immediately went to competition, lost everything, but he got stripes because he showed heart, because he worked hard. And that also pissed me off, because I'm like, I come every time I have to travel far. Then when I go home, the first 6 months, I just only cried back home. You have bruises all over because they were not gentle. And the fact for me that people don't realize that for people with mental health struggles, with PTSD, with depression, showing up, whatever it is that they're showing up for, is already a championship round. But then I asked him to pause, because I studied in Oxford for a while. And I said, like, yeah, I want to continue martial arts because I am pig-headed. So I'm not somebody to give up. So as I said, I did. And also I started with yoga. And there I met my first yoga teacher, and she was trauma-informed. And that somehow placed the seed already that trauma-informed practice is something special. I didn't connect it yet with martial arts, because in BJ I was still like, a white belt. I didn't know much. But there, where I trained, the people were a bit smaller, and they understood smaller bodies. So I wouldn't say that the martial artists there were necessarily trauma informed, but they understood that if somebody's new, you kind of have to start at the beginning and meet
Mhm.
them a bit more where they are at. So then I realized that actually the BJ practice could be fun, which was
Mhm.
something that I had not experienced before. So then when I came back, I finished my master's. Then for my PhD, I came to Germany where I met my husband. But also there, that coach saw his female students as his personal dating pool.
Mhm.
So there we got the next hurdle that when I said no repeatedly, and this person really tried sending, pictures, asking whether I would go with him on his seminar tour through Europe, even though he had a girlfriend and all this kind of stuff, trying to isolate me. And then later also shouting at my then boyfriend, now husband. We were also like, no, I just don't. I pay for a service, which is teaching me martial arts. That's really all it is. And so we left. And since my husband also had already black belt in a different martial arts and it was always his dream to have his own school, we were like, be the change you want to see in the world,
Yeah.
basically. So as baby blue belts, which is kind of a thing because you're still quite new yourself, we opened our own trauma informed and martial arts school. And that's how these things came together.
Yeah.
So we studied also further, ecological psychology, neurobiology, understanding how trauma works in the body, in the brain, and how martial arts sports can help, because martial arts can help so, so, so much, provided that the environment is safe, that the coaches are safe, that the cueing is safe. So even though they're not big changes, but if you're mindful of it, you can create such an amazing place for people to thrive.
Yeah, there was so much in what you just shared that I'm like it's a whole new world and it's all new to me, which I love. I love getting exposed to all this. I'm kind of curious. I know your story. You said that you got into this space because of like a sexual assault attack against you. How common is that? How common is it that you see, and maybe it's different for you guys now having your trauma informed clinic, maybe that's different, but what is that? Do you even know? Like, what is the frequency of like, is that normal for women that are in that world, that that's the reason that they get into it? Or are most women coming into it for a different reason?
I think most do come because they have some baggage. And the reason is
Mm-hmm.
also the marketing of martial arts. Because what do martial arts schools actually promise? Safety, confidence, these self-defense. That's
Mm-hmm.
also like, I think that what the martial arts industry doesn't understand is that the type of language and the type of marketing that they use attracts people with trauma or people that
Yeah.
want to prevent it. Maybe it happened to a friend or to a daughter or who knows. And they
Yeah.
are like, I want to prevent this. Like in my case, that's how I started, but it completely transformed into pure joy for the
Mm-hmm.
art. And I've heard that, of course, there are also enough that just do it because they love martial arts. But,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not only talking about women, but in general, there are many. I mean, people feel attracted because when you feel vulnerable, you want to become strong. And many martial arts schools claim that they do, which we
Mm-hmm.
will probably dive into. I don't necessarily think, because they always say, oh, martial arts, makes you a better person. No, it just makes you skilled at violence. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make you necessarily a better person. If you are not a very good person, you just get, you're still that person with just more skills. Martial arts can definitely, when you have a growth mindset, when you want to change things, you definitely can.
Okay, now that you've brought that up, I would love to dive into that because I mean, as I've heard, like a lot of people, especially as a parent, we have kids and like they'll want to put their kids in martial arts for the discipline, for the like the mindset piece of it. So I've always seen it kind of from that lens. I love that you brought up that idea that like if you're it can be, but that doesn't necessarily mean what it is. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think especially with kids, what's interesting is that in Germany, schools start like mid-September,
Mm-hmm.
and we can put a clock on it. In October, we get always a massive new wave of kids. Why? Because they're getting bullied. It's every year the same. October is always a big month for us
Fascinating.
because
Yeah.
kids go to school. After a month, they realize, oh, and boom, they're here. So we talk about self-discipline because I think that some people and parents tend to confuse discipline with obedience.
Mm-hmm.
That they are like, yeah, I want my kid to listen, all that. But that's a kind of a different thing. So how we
Mm-hmm.
frame it, and I know I think our school is not necessarily representative of most martial arts schools, but how we frame it is like we try to instill in them self-discipline. Like, for instance, they had a rough day in school, that when they come into class, that they still are a good training partner,
Mm-hmm.
that they don't start smashing other kids around or use them as a punch buddy because they're mad. They had a really stressful day. That they
Mm-hmm.
learn that they're happy still to be there, that they understand that you can still get a lot out of training despite the fact that the day was rough. So when
Mm-hmm.
we notice also, sometimes we had one time a kid, he came in and he started smashing kids and he never smashed kids. So instead of being mad and wanting to be obedient, like, yeah, you have to stop, I asked him, like, hey, how was your day? And he said his day was shit. He had a bad note in math, and then he had some struggle with his parents, bad day. So I said to him, okay, can you will you have more math tests? He said, yeah. I was like, does that, can you kind of level that out with the grades? He said, yeah, I can. It's like, can you ask your teacher what went wrong? He's like, yes, I can. I said, okay. I said, okay, so this is not like a all lifetime disaster. And the kid said, no, it's not. Okay. I said, well, despite all, I'm very happy you're here and let's have some fun. And he said, yes,
Mm-hmm.
I'm also happy to be here with this super angry face. I'm also happy to be here. But he stopped, of course, smashing kids. And yes, it wasn't the best class for him that he ever had, but he calmed down. And
Mm-hmm.
these are those little things where they learn resilience, growth mindset, discipline. And that's, I think, what martial arts could do. But you could also
Yeah.
learn this in any other sport, whether that's hockey or volleyball or soccer, I think, or football. I think that because this is something that happens to everyone. We all have bad days, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's necessarily isolated from martial arts only.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that, I mean, it's so valuable to learn those skills, and where you learn those skills doesn't make a big difference, like in how you learn them. I know when you and I originally talked, I mean, kind of going back to this idea, and like you talked a little bit about your, like the mentor at the school that was like using it just for a dating pool for women and things like that. I would love to know, kind of like as a woman in this field that is, I would say, overarching more of a masculine field, like in essence, how has that journey been for you? Experience, like being in a very masculine world. I think in general, our world is very masculine, right? Like most of the things that we're doing are very masculine. And a lot of people are in these very masculine spaces, especially like building a business or in corporate or wherever. But like, in the martial arts world, that's like even amplified. Like it is a very masculine dominated sort of area. And so, how have you seen that? Like, not just your experience, I guess, but like women in general's experience in that sort of a space?
As you say, it's massively male dominated. I mean, if you also look at MMA at the UFC, I mean, several years ago, Dana White said that he could never even imagine having women fight on his promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are there and it's super exciting. And you see the same in jiu-jitsu, that men get paid more for, super fights and
Mm-hmm.
competitions than women do. Of course, some are saying, yeah, it's about that men attract more viewers. Maybe. Some say, yeah, the brackets are more stacked. Okay, yeah. So some promotions now make it equal in the sense that when the brackets are full, they get equal pay. Okay. But it's always a struggle. You kind
Mm-hmm.
of have to enforce it. You have to really just keep on posting about it, trying to hold them accountable. You have to force it. It will not happen on its own. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like, I think, the overarching thing what I've experienced and witnessed is that every every step that's better for women in martial arts, it has been really hard fought.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, like also what I mentioned, like that one of my students mentioned the other day, that he has an ongoing discussion with somebody who also trains martial arts elsewhere, and he cannot fathom that my student has, apart from my husband, also a female coach. He's like, what can you learn from her?
Mm.
The best coaches are the coaches that train the person in front of them, that realize what a student, what a individual needs.
Yeah.
When that happens to be a woman or person of color or whoever, when they are best suited, when they realize they are like, this is what this person needs so that they thrive and get better in their sport, why wouldn't you learn from them? I think, like,
Mm-hmm.
what has gender to do with anything? So you have that. I've noticed, like, when you would go, especially in the beginning, now we're like more established, and also because of Off the Zone, people know us, so you get more respect. But especially when we were still like baby blues, because like in jiu-jitsu, it's like, for some, it's still very important. It's changing a little bit, but lineage is important. Like, who is your black belt? Who is their black belt? And all that. In competition, as coaches, if there was a dispute, they wouldn't even listen to me. Or when it was before a competition that all the coaches come together, that they just explain the rule set once more, that they were like, what are you doing here? Like these kind of things. So they don't take you seriously. It's changing.
Mhm.
Like some
Mhm.
they do, like there are some very good black belt women, but also they still have to fight for things. It is getting better. And also more women are practicing the sport. I mean, if I think
Mhm.
about the amount of women I had when I started, I mean, I was the only one, but now when women start, there's usually a handful, you know, so there's more. And some even have really nice, big, established women's teams. So that is already so much better. But I think there's still a lot of work to do. As I said, there's also no overarching organization. Like with
Mhm.
judo and other Olympic sports, you usually have an organization. Yeah, abuse still happens, but at least there's some sort of oversight.
Mhm.
Jiu-jitsu, you don't. So with us, like we cannot change what the head coach wants to do. So yeah, we left. So, but it's also hard because if it's kind of more grooming, coercive control, love
Mhm.
bombing, it's hard to prove. It's not necessarily criminal either. So
Mhm.
you also can't really report it unless it's really sexual assault, when it's a minor, these kind of thing. So they sometimes also stay very well within the lanes of what's legal, illegal. It's highly inappropriate, but it's not
Mhm.
criminal yet. So you also can't really get further there.
Yeah.
And also many, and that I think that's the main point, skill and medals is more important than women's safety. So
Yeah.
if a head coach is known, and some are known that they really did horrible things, some even went to jail, but since they're such great fighters, they still get
Do you think that this is a like a cultural thing inside of the martial arts world, or do you think it's more on a larger scale of looking at like how society in general views women? Or I mean, I hear you talking about like the grooming thing too, and I know at least for me there's a lot of publicity, like I get a lot of messages and see a lot of messages around that. Do you think some of it's like the awareness of like these behaviors have maybe been here systemically for a really long time, and we just never really as a society thought that they were important enough to talk about? Like we just like I see a lot of things happen and people are like, oh, that's just the way it is, like, oh, that's just the way it is, and it's like, well, no, these behaviors are really inappropriate, like this is not how it should be. Do you think that there's some element of that, or is it like, do you think there's something totally different amplified within that community and space?
I just think they are like, I don't know, 100 years behind. Because if you think about it, it's usually male dominated. They are the black belt. And I mean, there's always this running gag, you know, that when you get your black belt, you start giving people life advice.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some truth to this joke, yeah, because many really believe I have a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so I can give you advice on anything, which is of course nonsense, but
Mm-hmm.
it does happen. And I think that they just go unchecked. And some also they do win many medals. And I mean, if you look at their skill set, it is amazing what they do. So they get also a lot of love and support. And I think some people, they kind of lose their footing with the earth. They're
Mm-hmm.
not grounded anymore. And they
Mm-hmm.
think they can just treat people like trash, or they can just take what they want. And if people don't want to give it, then you get punished for it. And I
Yeah.
definitely believe that martial arts does have the right criteria to create cults, because you have
Mm.
somebody that you look up to. Every school usually has some sort of speciality. And I mean, some schools also, like when they are in the same town, like in Munich, there's like two, they're like opposite each other. They don't like each other. So there is this kind of us and them, which is really a
Interesting.
shame. I
Yeah.
mean, there are other places like in Berlin, they have a super open culture. There you have open mats, and like open mats is like that you don't have training, but you just train together, and people from all kinds of different gyms come together, train together. So there are places where it's super open. In Munich, where we are, not yet. I hope this will change. But so you can see that there are changes happening,
Yeah.
but they are hard fought. But of course, we have slowly more women. We have also more women that are co-owners, more women that coach, because usually that's another thing. When women teach, the majority either teach children or women. I'm one of the few, or one of the first, in definitely in Munich, that one teaches like all the time, but also that
Mm-hmm.
teaches mixed groups and not just only women and kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's this assumption that, yeah, women, yeah, they're good with children. Yeah, women, they should then teach other women. And I'm like, well, women can also teach men, you know?
Fascinating. Yeah. And I think like you brought up this idea too of like that us versus them mentality. I mean, I see that a lot. I think that that's I mean, you are in Germany, but in the United States right now, that's where like all of our political divide is coming from, is this us versus them mentality. And that us versus them mentality doesn't serve anybody. Nobody gets better. Nobody gets what they want. Like it just creates this war and this thing. And I wonder, like, is that part of humankind? Like, is that human nature for us to create? I know part of it is it's the sense of like we have this innate desire to create connection and to attract to people or to feel like we have commonality with people. And so we create these like bonds of commonality. So I think some of that does that us versus them mentality is partly human behavior and like human nature. But I also see how, like you said, like there's these environments and these cultures and these systemic things that we have that breed it and make it fester and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like creates, rather than this, like, I want to belong, like I want a community, a place of people I can belong, it creates this like outsider, insider, you belong or you don't belong. And now it creates this almost warlike behavior. Yeah, I would love your thoughts on that.
I think humans want safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that people think that when you belong to a group or you identify with specific groups or specific things, that that can create safety. Because of course we know in
Yeah.
the wild, like we know from neurobiology that, which is really interesting, that if somebody got kicked out of the tribe, their nervous system and body and mind already started to prepare for a fight because
Mhm.
it usually meant you were gonna die. Like either, I don't know, you met a bear or you would starve, but one way or another, your body was already preparing basically to just fight it out, but die. And interesting enough, that also on social media, when you get shunned, for instance, on social media, the same mechanisms start in your brain. That's why so
Mhm.
many teenage girls, for instance, have already depression and stuff because they get kind of shunned all the time. So
Mhm.
our biology is like, oh my god, I'm shot, am I gonna die? So that's why we get these weird things. So I can see why for safety we want to belong somewhere,
Mhm.
but at the same time I'm also like, we need collaboration to get further. It's like
Mhm.
also we can only learn about ourselves in relation to other people. Like how can we know ourselves when we don't interact with other people? And I
Mhm.
think that there is the thing that maybe what we need to reframe is our sense of safety, or what is safety really like.
Yeah.
I would think um, collaboration seems to me much safer than when you indeed have this very sharp, like us, them, black and white kind of thing, because
Mhm.
that is confrontational. Whereas I'm thinking there will always be some conflict, but as long as there's a common ground and we can still
Mhm.
collaborate, I think that creates so much more safety. And I mean, in the
Mhm.
jiu-jitsu world, you have this term creonte, and that was like not a positive thing if you would cross train. Oh no. If you dare to cross train, go to a different gym. Sometimes you would be shunned, you would be seen as disloyal. And luckily, that's now also starting to change. But I experienced also that if I, for academia, would just take my gi and I would just go anywhere, and that coach, I know he did not like it. He didn't like it. And I'm like,
Fascinating.
it is fascinating. That's why I say that in many ways, I think martial arts culture is kind of like behind, a bit primitive.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it is. It's so fascinating. And I know like that idea of safety that you talk about, like, is a lot of what I talk about too, like with our nervous systems of like, we want these goals and we want to achieve these things and we want to do these things, but especially a woman's body needs to feel safety in order to be able to create or to be able to think or to be able to, love and like all these things that we really want to do in life. Like we have to have this sense of safety. And I think right now, a lot of women don't feel safety, whether it's politically, whether it's physically, whether it's legally, like whatever. Like there's a lot of safety issues surrounding women. And so, like, just to circle back, like this conversation, it's like there is so much in the sense of like people feeling the need for safety. And I think a lot of us are not finding it in a lot of ways. And I think that fight or flight, I actually was just telling somewhere, I just was talking about my kids and I watched the movie Mufasa. And I don't, have you seen it? The new
Not yet.
Lion King? Okay. No, no spoiling, but there's like the gist of the whole movie is like Mufasa and his little tribe of lions are being chased and attacked, like chased by these other group of lions, right? They're the outsiders and they're like just what you're talking about, this like us versus them type of mentality. And these lions are chasing them the entire time. And I, watching this movie with my kids, I was like, I could not settle. I could not enjoy the movie. Even the moments when they're like love song or funny things or like happy things or like whatever, the entire movie, I'm sitting there being like, they're being chased by lions. They're being chased by lions. I legit like was in that fight or flight, like anxiousness sort of feel the entire movie. And it was fascinating for me to replay it of like, I did not enjoy the movie, not because of the storyline or not because of the movie itself, but like I could not get myself into a place of like actually being able to enjoy the movie because I was in that unsafe feeling the entire, like these lions, these like good people, the good lions are in an unsafe situation the entire movie. And yet how many women are feeling that all the time? This like, I'm living my life with this little bit of I'm unsafe all the time. And what that does to our bodies and what that does to our nervous systems, what that does to our psyches, like what that does to how we feel, like how we show up in the world every single day. And also then like what you're talking about and alluding to is like looking at these like systemic pressures or like even within certain groups, right? Like within even subgroups of like this is the martial arts like system. Here's the schooling system. I think you and I had even talked about that. Like when we had our little chat before was like, even within like education and within martial arts and within corporate and within all these different areas, the systems and the rules and the structures that are set up within those spaces and where we create that sense of safety for us as women to really thrive in those different areas when most of us are not feeling safe in a lot of those areas. And like you said, most of us are feeling that we have to prove something or we have to fight for something or we have to like work so hard. And we think of like, if we're having to fight for our rights, fight for our equality, fight for all of these things, like where in that are we feeling safe if we're in constant fight mode? And I know like you bring in this essence of like the trauma informed. And I imagine that that's kind of where you're like, how can we create this safety? Like, how can we step into this ability of yes, let's practice martial arts, but let's embody it in the sense of safety and allowing the body to breathe and allowing our nervous systems to relax a little bit. And like, actually, can we enjoy the art form, not from a place of just, I have to fight, but from a place of, wow, let's master the way my body moves and master the way my body feels when I actually practice this. And where does my mind go when I'm in these moves and like all of that. So I would love for you just to share a little bit like on that. Like, what does that look like for you? And what have you experienced there? I know I just shared a lot, but
Yeah. So circling back regarding safety and them and us, I also think people have this scarcity mindset that they feel that if they give something or that if somebody takes something, that something's taken away from them. But
yeah,
that's not necessarily the same thing.
totally.
You see this in martial arts too, that I'm kind of like sometimes you can all be good. You can all be number one in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like I always say, I don't compete against, I compete with other competitors because that is a nuance. Like I enjoy competing with them. I hope they get the best out of me and I hope I get the best out of them. I'm not, if I compete against them, that kind of again feels much more as if there is this scarcity, this strife thing. So that's one
Yeah.
thing I wanted to point out. And
Yeah.
also regarding safety, we have, we start from 3 years old. And when girls turn like 7, 8, then sometimes I already overhear them saying things that they are aware that it's good that they do martial arts or that they are aware that there is a safety issue. It starts already at 7, 8 years old. And when I realized that, I found it shocking, not surprised, but still hurt me. I'm like, oh my God, they're so cute and innocent and all that. And yet the girls are already aware that there is something that they probably don't really understand yet. How can they? Because they're still so tiny, but they know there's something that they kind of need to kind of, yeah, prevent or like save themselves from. And
Yeah.
that I think is very disheartening, really. So we have a completely different approach than many others, again, because indeed healing, but also learning takes place when the nervous system is in rest and digest. If we are in fight and flight, we don't listen, like our rational brain is usually offline. We don't listen to anything anymore. You see this
Mhm.
in martial arts when, people spar and it kind of like escalates, or if you coach them in a competition and you shout as loud as you can, but it doesn't come through, that means that they're too far, they're too aroused. So that means that I was thinking, okay, we have people with trauma, we have also people with social anxiety, we have like many neurodivergent people. So I need to get them in rest and digest. How do I do that? Well, the stakes need to be low. And in order to do that, games. So we invested heavily in ecological psychology and ecological dynamics. It's the field of study, how you learn to move. Doesn't matter what, can be like, I don't know, how you drink your tea, but any movement we do. So it's again that it's about the interplay between us and the environment, because the environment kind of prompts us to behave and act in certain ways. And so in martial arts, there are certain behaviors that we want to see. And instead of giving them a step-by-step technique, what, by the way, takes away choice and is top down, which is something you want to avoid with people with trauma, because, or anyone really, because you want to practice self-autonomy and resilience. So you want them to have choice and space to explore. So instead of step by step and that they repeat the movement, we want them to repeat a problem. We want to repeat them, that they repeat solutions, but they can look anytime different. So in jiu-jitsu, for instance, there is something called like passing the guard. So one is on the ground, lying supine, and the other wants to get past the legs and usually get a chest to chest or a chest to back connection. Now, there are many ways you can do that. And each technique is basically a solution that worked once upon a time for someone in a specific environment. And you can never completely recreate it because everything is always slightly different. So instead of us telling them those techniques, we just tell them, well, you want to get past the legs and get chest to chest or chest to back connection. And then they will figure it out. We can add other constraints. We could say, oh, you have to keep both knees off the ground. Or one point, one knee needs to be on the ground or two knees on the ground. So we change the constraints and that will change the environment. Hence, it will change the solutions they can come up with because they have different options, different affordances. And in this way, if it doesn't work, they're not disheartened, because usually if you try this technique and it doesn't work, you feel like that you're stupid or something, and some people feel shame. But like this, no, it's just information like, okay, this didn't work. Usually you want to try it at least twice because, maybe it does work. And also when people figure out solutions themselves, it's there. I can tell them, if I tell them details, but they weren't ready for it, as in they weren't aware of this problem, they will listen, they will say yes, but the body doesn't listen to what the coach says. But if they would ask me questions, say, hey, doesn't this work? But here somehow I have this problem, then we can together solve it. And then they will remember. And that's the next thing. People with trauma, they have this disconnection with body and mind. So if I give them step-by-step instruction, it's an internal focus, because then they have to think like my left hand there, my right. But that's not what you want. I want them to have an external focus, because if they go internal, I don't know where they go. But if they have an external focus, as in get past the legs, you want to twist the spine, you want to somehow get the arms over the head and keep them there, you want to off balance them, or get their hip to the ground, get their hands to the ground. These are all external cues that they can focus on, so they remain in the present, and I know where they are. And it's playful, and they learn so quickly. It's amazing. And they also come up with solutions so much better than I ever thought of. I'm like, wow, this is like much better than I have in mind. So we have a very playful, but don't forget, some people think that trauma from coaching is cuddling, but we basically spar the whole class. It's just different intensity. Like the complexer the game, the less the intensity. If it's not just a simple game, they can be more intense. But when we get visitors that train a lot, they are out of breath within 15, 20 minutes because they're not used to basically sparring all the time. Because then you listen to 10 minutes of instruction, then you drill it for 15 minutes without resistance. You don't get tired from that. But we are all the time, you get real life feedback. So you also know whether it works or not. And for somebody with trauma, if you come because you want to learn to defend yourself or because of confidence, when you drill things and then it doesn't work, when somebody resists, that is a blow really to your confidence.
Yeah.
Whereas when you all the time get feedback whether things work or not, you know what works or not. And of course, there's a thing about size and skill and all that kind of stuff. But within the parameters of more or less people your own size, you know what works and what doesn't.
So fascinating. And like all of these things, like I think about like what you're doing and how you're transforming the way that people learn the martial arts, and then that space. It's like, how could we transform that and take that trauma informed approach into all areas of our lives. Like, I mean, in school, in healthcare, in all of these things of like, it doesn't, and even just go back to you made a comment earlier. I had a previous guest on the episodes, Alva. Has cerebral palsy and she's in a wheelchair. And one of the things we talked about there was like giving her access, or like, people with disabilities access to certain areas doesn't take away from other areas or to other people. And so just like you were talking about too, of like how we could infuse this sense of trauma informed into all areas of life and like practices and stuff like that doesn't take away from people who haven't experienced trauma, although probably everybody has experienced some sort of trauma. It's just a level of how aware they are to that trauma and how intense that trauma was. But we all experience traumas. But if we had that embedded in our practice area everywhere, how different life would be.
I would say first step for both teachers and CEOs or managers, do not take things seriously. Personally, sorry, to not take people,
Yeah.
like when they have an off day or they lash out or whatever, just don't take it personally. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
But when you don't, that already, and instead of getting angry that somebody just behaves maybe like an ass, whatever, you ask them, hey, how was your day? Are you all right? Just asking this question. And some people may answer truthfully, some may not. But the fact that somebody noticed and cared to ask, that does already so much. I think by the end of the day, it comes down to whether people feel seen, heard, understood, and
Yeah.
wanted also. And indeed, when you have people with disabilities, I mean, they have a disability doesn't mean that they cannot do anything. Like, it's not that they're helpless. And indeed, what would it take away from us if somebody's in a wheelchair, that we just have elevators and broad enough spaces and I don't know, maybe automatic doors, whatever, that they just can go? Because as long as that old and when they can move and otherwise and they can type or I don't know what, they can do most jobs
Yeah.
just the same as people that can walk. So I don't see indeed how that would take away. And these are like these little things that would help and set so many people free. Actually, you set them up for success because then they can do what they can do. Like I'm an ancient historian, and my master thesis was about physically disabled slaves. Why? Because I noticed
Interesting.
there was a passage where they were very, very expensive and wanted at one point. And I was like, why? And well, for one, it was a status symbol. If you could have slaves that couldn't work, you're obviously very rich. And there was a averting the evil eye type of thing. But also, when you look into the digest where and you talk about buying and selling slaves, they even talk about that as long as the slave can do the job that you want that slave to do, it doesn't matter whether they have 12 toes or are disabled or this and that, because in a way, they're not. If you have somebody, say, in a wheelchair that can do a desk job, then they are in that is essence not less able than
Yeah.
those that are not. And I liked that idea that for them that they also say that so if you buy then a slave, and I mean, of course, slavery is another big topic, but just within the context of Rome where that happened, if you cannot get your money back when you knew that they had, I don't know, a disability, but they could still do the job you wanted to do. And I found that says something also about how they thought about being abled or not abled and in what way. That sometimes I think we can learn some things because indeed, if you would be a Roman family and you have it's accessible for this person, they would by their definition would not be seen as disabled. And I
That
found
makes
that
sense.
very
I mean,
fascinating.
it does make sense. Like we put the labels on what disability is, and yeah, yeah.
Like for another instance, a good friend of mine, she has mental illness, but also she cannot move her arm up than this, and she competes, and she has this kind of sling thing that it's like safe. And I mean, there are not many para athletes, so often she just competes against what we say abled bodies that have everything. She still wins, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, so yes, she is disabled in the sense by law, and yes, she needs medical care and all this kind of thing. So yes, she is. But it doesn't mean she's therefore helpless and cannot kick able bodies' asses because she does.
You're like, I've seen it. She does.
She does. But do you
Yeah.
think that she gets support from the German organization that they would pay? They pay other athletes, but not her, even though she's one of the most successful.
Mhm.
There you see again that people still think that when people are disabled, that they somehow are helpless and cannot do anything.
Mhm.
Nonsense.
It is. It's all just the perception and the labels that we make of it and like where we put it. And it's actually, I mean, this is a whole different conversation, but something I've been looking at recently is where beliefs in our society around things like this, like around disability or around whatever, come from. Like, where are they, like, where are these things that are taboo? Where did they come from? And one of the things recently I discovered was like women, like I had a post go viral on social media, and all these men have been saying that like women's vaginas smell up the wazoo. And like that's why women were taught to sit with their legs crossed, whatever. And so I started, my client said, oh, it's because you should look up this thing about Lysol. Lysol did a campaign around wanting women to use Lysol up the vagina for contraceptive use, and also how it would help save your marriage because then, you know, your husband wouldn't be mortified by the smell of your vagina, blah, 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 blah. Like there was all this stuff. And I went back and I'm like, wow, all of like the stigma and these things around like women douching and women's vagina smelling and all this stuff stemmed from a marketing campaign to sell Lysol. And I was like, man, I wonder where else this is like it's played out. Well, then I heard about the same thing with razors.
Yep.
That the whole reason that women have, there's like so much taboo around women having underarm hair or leg hair was when they were selling razors to men to shave their face and realized that there was a whole half of the population that they couldn't market to because they didn't have hair to shave off. That it was a marketing campaign that led to making women believe that having underarm hair or leg hair was unbeautiful, whatever, so that they could sell these razors. And then just this morning, I was on a podcast and the woman said the same thing about pubic hair, that the whole thing about pubic hair being taboo and like women not wanting pubic hair and waxing and shaving and everything came out of the pornography like scene or industry around that they couldn't video and photograph as well if you had pubic hair. And so that whole like, and it was just, it fascinates me to the wazoo to look at like, where these where these beliefs that we have around beauty or around ability or around whatever it is, how it comes out of somewhere in something, but yet it gets generation after generation or whatever, it gets adopted into our society as just a way of being, and how nobody sits there and questions, why do we think this way? Why do we believe this? Like, why? I mean, even culturally around the world, like belly fat is seen as something totally different than it is in other cultures. And like, where and why are we not being more aware of why we believe certain things and why we act the same, like certain ways? Like, why, what is it, like you just said about disability? Why do we even have this stigma around disability? Like, what is it that made that happen? Like, what, you know, like all these different things. Like, I'm sitting in this place of like, how can we start looking at these things that we do and act and behave and really start to question like what and where did this come from? Like why do we think this way?
But it
Yeah.
comes back to safety. If you don't feel safe, then you are not ready for confrontational thoughts or conversations because then you're
Mhm.
afraid that something will be taken away from you. I mean, by the end of the day, a lot is indeed driven by power and money. Really,
Totally.
that's like, you know, sounds maybe very cliche, but that's often where it comes down to. And some people are very good in playing the game of power
Mhm.
because, you know, when you defame another, can give you more power. There's so many ways to play this, right?
Mhm.
Especially when you say that the woman's vagina stinks or that she's ugly if she has hair on her legs or armpits. That's already, you know, then you're already dealing out some heavy cards, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
also right like a fight. Like you're already kind of, I wouldn't say dehumanizing, but you already have very clear standards that if you don't
Mhm.
do that, you're not being taken seriously or you're not considered beautiful or useful or anything like that.
Mhm. It's
That's
like
already a
control.
very strong, yeah, that's control and a
Mhm.
very strong power play. So
Mhm.
I think when we indeed, as people, nations, as cultures, indeed, when we would feel safer, then we dare to go a bit more out of our comfort zone and to ask, why do I indeed think that?
Yeah.
This is like, we see it same in jiu-jitsu, right? Like I explained about ecological dynamics. Like many jiu-jitsu coaches are very unhappy with it. Why? Because they teach step by step, because their coach did it and their coach did it. And they'll say that, yeah, well, that's how I've been taught. But I'm like,
Mhm.
that's the same argument as what we always say. Okay, so if your friend jumps off a bridge, you do too. But it sounds stupid, but it's the same thing. And they
Yeah.
also did not stop and think that maybe asking themselves, hey, I don't know, 10, 20 years has come by. Maybe there are now better teaching modalities. Let's look
Mm-hmm.
into it. And since, for instance, ecological dynamics is so effective, like what took me a year or two, some people, when they train like similar, they do it now in half the time, simply because the approach, in my view, is just so much better based on
Mm-hmm.
what we know now, and may also change again, and we will learn new things. But as it stands now, I think it's far superior. And many coaches find that very confrontational because they're like, yeah, but you know, are you saying I did things wrong? And I'm like, no, but there's
Mm-hmm.
just a better way. But then many they just it's too much. It's too confronting because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
did I then waste time? And yeah, sometimes I also feel like we wasted time, but it actually excites me because I'm like, how cool is it that what took us 2 years, our students can do it in 1 year?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how cool is that? That means for me progress. But again, those coaches think that again something is taking away from them as if they're
Yeah.
not legit. And I'm like, no, those years based on what was known back then, it took longer, but it still got
Mm-hmm.
you there. Like, I don't think that it's like it takes anything away from you. But
Yeah.
many still feel it as an attack, and somehow
Yeah.
everything feels for many people like a personal attack. I think if we cannot shed that, it is hard to ask the real questions. Or maybe people do ask them, but they don't share it, don't talk about it really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you are correct. I think it's weird too, this like idea that if I had to struggle to get there, I can't remember if I don't think it was you, but or whoever I was talking about, but like this idea of like if I had to struggle to get these results, then therefore or maybe it was you. We were like, then therefore other women need to struggle just like this to get there. And how that mentality even too of like if it was that hard for me, if I had to fight for this, but now there's an easier way, like, why would we want that next generation or the next group of people coming up after me? Why would I want them to have to go through the same struggles rather than can I share them the things that actually worked and made it easier or these advancements and how, like, it's this weird thing that it does to the psyche of I've proven myself. Therefore, you have to prove yourself too. And this, like, proving energy of, like, I don't know, it's very fascinating.
It is like indeed in academia where I come from, I've seen it that you had female professors that worked really hard,
Mm-hmm.
especially the older ones that were one of the first female professors. They were like the absolute worst to younger women. That
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but you paved the way for us. Like we are grateful. Really, we are grateful. But why
Yeah.
do you make it even harder for us? Why? I mean, academia on its own is already tough enough, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Why add additional things? Same with jujitsu, like, jujitsu or any martial art or any endeavor you choose is already hard enough on its own. Like learning new skills is
Mm-hmm.
already tough enough. Why would you add all these additional blockades and obstacles that are not necessary?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so for me also, I never understood that because I would be actually looked back with pride, thinking like, I'm happy that they didn't have to go through. That's the
Yeah.
same for me with the trauma informed teaching in our school. Is that I wanted our people at the space that we did not have, and I really needed and wanted because we have somebody like he has social anxiety. I mean, social anxiety and physical touch, close physical touch, those things kind of sound as if they don't mix, but in the right environment, they can.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that is like I'm like that is progress. That people that
Mm-hmm.
normally would then be like, "Well, I do a solo sport or whatever," is like, no, I actually now go and sweat with other people. I think that's a huge win. And I
Yeah.
think when we focus much more on that, then you can see how much impact we have, even with relatively simple things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even then, it's just like that whole overarching idea of like, this is how we advance humankind. Like, we advance by trying to share and teach that. And I look at my clients, I'm like, I forever would want my clients to be able to get to results faster than I did and to be able to be like, don't do what I did, like, do this instead. And that's like why that mentality of, no, I want them to struggle. Like, they need to go through this just as hard. Even looking at my kids, like I would do anything to help my kids learn the lessons I learned. Like I went through them the hard way. I would not want them to have to go through them the hard way. Like I would love to impart that. And that's how we I mean, some things they have to learn the hard way, but like that is part of life, is like, how
Yeah.
do we pass these things on to the next generations and the next peoples, and so that we advance instead of just keep ourselves stuck.
Yeah, but for some reason, say these female professors, they think that if younger generation women don't suffer as much or grow quicker, that again
Yeah.
something is taken away from them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not. It has nothing to do with you, really.
Yeah.
They take it personal, and that's what I hope that we can somehow instill. And that's what we really try to instill in, especially like the younger members. Also, that we have, we do have these conversations. Like we have conversations like a girl taps a boy, boy's upset. If a boy would have tapped that same boy, it would not have been a problem. So I asked him like, why are you upset? Yeah, I got submitted by a girl. I said, why does it upset you? Because she had the better skill. And usually it is because girls just listen better and actually do what we kind of want them to do. Like, no offense, usually the boys that just like, just mess around and fight, they get the good, but it takes a while. It's fine. I told him like, yeah, but the factor was not because necessarily she was a girl, but just because her skill set was better and her strategy was better. That's really what it is. And you can also do that. I mean, in this case, listening a bit more, but like, I mean, you don't have to, but then it just takes a bit longer. It's like
Yeah.
we don't talk about consequence, we talk about outcomes. So I think
Mm-hmm.
consequence has a little bit of negative connotations. I like outcomes, where outcomes can go any way.
Mm-hmm.
But we have these conversations. I'm like, yeah, but what is exactly upsetting you? The fact that you got tapped or the fact that it was done by a girl? Because there are two different things. Because if you have difficulty with everybody tapping you, it means there's an ego thing. So we have to, okay, so probably yes, the kid has a fixed mindset, thinks losing is bad and looks bad on him, even though actually losing is the best way to learning. I mean, winning is a shitty teacher. So,
Mm-hmm.
we have these conversations. So I really hope that in our school that at least the kids that we can give them some tools as they go
Mm-hmm.
on their journey, because some stay, some of course go, do other things, pursue other interests, which is totally fine. But yeah, I think this feeling unsafe, scarcity, being afraid for many things really is what I think prevents us as human beings to really evolve in a more human way. Like
Yeah.
technology, oh yeah, we evolve. But I think the social part, that's what needs evolving the most at the moment.
Yeah. So good. I think we'll end there because that was like, you just recapped the whole thing so good and it felt juicy. I appreciate you so much for coming on here and sharing all of what you did and just being open and willing to have the conversation and to share these things and to discuss them. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, I know you have lots of new things coming up in your world. Where can they learn more about that? What do you have coming up that you would be open to sharing for people that may be interested?
First of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate
Yeah.
you too. So we have an online platform, Off the Zone. Also on Instagram, you'll find us under Off the Zone. And our signature program is the Thrive Method. And that's specifically geared to coaches and martial arts athletes. So we help them become trauma informed, understanding, teaching them what trauma is, and also specifically how you can use martial arts training to kind of rewrite the amygdala, or at least that the amygdala also gets other input, so that it doesn't go immediately into fight flight. So you can kind of help with healing. It's not the same as professional mental health care, but it definitely can support with healing. This is important. And we focus on, of course, personal development, because as a coach, even when you know everything there is to know about trauma, but you're still not approachable, you're not really going to make an impact. And the third pillar is really about safeguarding measures. How do you create and save school and actually prevent most bad things from happening? And
Mm-hmm.
of course, have protocols in place that if something still happens, you know what to do and how to do it and remain calm about it. So we launch in June, and you can already enroll now. It's lifetime access. It's one-time payment, or also like in installments, but it's lifetime access. And we launch twice a year. We have expert coaches like licensed psychologists, sports psychologists, neurobiology. We have all kinds, a lot also about neurodiversity. Everything is there, so that if you realize, hey, I have, for instance, my first transgender student, then we have lessons about that. How can you create a neutral room, something to make them feel safe? Oh, I have the first person that says to me, hey, I have PTSD. We have protocols and stuff for that. So it's a growing directory. We have a core curriculum that, of course, go through, and the rest is basically based on your needs. You can
Mm-hmm.
add additional classes. So that's really what it is. It's an ongoing, growing thing. Also, when something gets debunked, we also update that, because we are we try to stay also on the cutting edge with
Yeah.
research. So yeah, that's what it's about.
Very cool. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I will make sure that we have all of that linked up in the show notes for anybody who's interested in learning more and going diving deep in there. Good luck with your launch and program. I know it's going
Thank
to
you.
serve the people that it really needs to serve in the biggest way. So I hope it does amazing for you. And I thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Renae.